My Staff connects the right people and the right companies, fast, friendly, and focused on results. From temporary staffing to executive recruitment, the My Staff team knows Nebraska business and delivers a job done right. Accounting talent is tough to find, but not for Lisa Waite. She has the pulse on the talent pool and delivers results. Save time, skip the struggle, and let My Staff partner for success. Visit mystaff.com to learn more. Whatever your hiring need or career move, My Staff is your employment partner for a job done right. Visit mystaff.com or call 402-614-1441. Because at My Staff, we're not just recruiters, we're partners in your success story.
When you're managing an HR department, you're often the bearer of bad news.
Rising costs, employee turnover, cultural complaints, key people not feeling appreciated, compliance concerns, and so much more.
It's time to change the conversation. It's time to deliver real results to your leadership team. It's time to think more broadly.
It's time you meet with Ellerbrock Norris.
Ellerbrock Norris will help you think differently about the benefits world and be your advocate to broader risk management across your organization.
After one meeting, your team will walk away knowing how one or two small changes can create amazing ripple effects across your entire company.
Set up your free risk consultation today at ellerbrock-norris.com. To the leaders who carry both people and pressure,
and the HR professionals growing into their influence,
to decisions that shape culture and careers,
and the responsibility that comes with them,
to strategy rooted in values,
and courage rooted in care,
to leadership that listens and leads,
and HR voices that matter.
Cheers to HR.
Cheers to HR. Welcome to HR Wine Bar. I'm Amy Luckenbill.
And I'm Jamie Mohrman. And we're thrilled today to be wrapping up our series on the language of leadership, where we've been talking with guests from the C-suite. We've talked so far to the CEO, CFO, and COO. So today we're bringing it back to one of our own in learning how to speak CHRO. And so this conversation today is really centered around leadership inside the HR function, influence without ego, and what it really means to carry the people agenda at the enterprise level. So we're thrilled to be joined today by Parker McKenna, CHRO at Mosaic, whose work centers around people, purpose, and impact. And we're so excited to have you. So welcome, Parker.
Thank you. Great to be here at the Wine Bar.
At the Wine Bar. Yes, we're thrilled as well and excited to hear more about your perspective. Parker and I have had a chance to work together in the past on the HR Nebraska State Council and know that you've held many roles in the volunteer space too throughout your HR career.
I have. I think it's important to, see both sides of this great career from the volunteer leader perspective and from the corporate or organizational perspective too.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for being part of this HR Wine Bar community as well. So as we kick off today, Parker, would you mind just kind of telling us a little bit about Mosaic, your role at Mosaic, and what being a CHRO means in that capacity?
Sure. Well, Mosaic is a healthcare organization. We're headquartered in Omaha. We have a presence in about 13 states across the country. We focus mostly in long-term care, and our largest client segment is people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we support them and help them live the life they want to live in whatever way they need that support and whatever way they want to live their lives, which is sort of our mission and how we pride ourselves. I've been with Mosaic for 7 years in the chief people officer role, leading HR. And prior to that, have about 25 years total in HR. The past 11 or 12 have been in senior or executive roles. Before coming to Mosaic, I was at Union Pacific Railroad and led different facets of corporate HR there. And before that, I was the CHRO of a large public school district in Missouri, which is a very interesting adventure. And then before that, I was in retail HR. So just have enjoyed, again, this fantastic workspace and career from many different industries and perspectives. It's been a great ride.
Absolutely. And we're loving hearing that perspective of HR across industries. You have the HR function, but each industry has its little nuances and getting connected to people in those same spaces. We've been talking a lot about that too, as you need to sometimes have that partner in your own space. One of the things that stood out to me as you were kind of sharing your experience, both public, private sector roles, large organizations, often when we look at HR from the outside, people don't understand how much we're standing kind of in the middle in our roles, right? We see the HR function and maybe you have a perception of what HR is, right? It's, well, that's hiring, firing, benefits, whatever. But in today's modern HR space, we're standing in the middle of everything, right? Leadership, goals, employee needs, systems, policies, sometimes things that are working, not working. And we're not just advocating in one direction, but rather constantly translating, listening, balancing needs, trying to make progress with all those stakeholders in mind. So from your experience through, the different industries you've been in, your current role, how have you felt that in your experiences, and where do you feel maybe most pulled into in those in the middle situations, and which do you feel maybe doesn't get enough attention about that dynamic at play in the space?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough question. I hope they're not all this tough. It's gonna be a bumpy ride otherwise.
They are this tough.
Oh
So,
no, oh no.
oh no.
It's funny because I think I laugh because my parents are both retired, but who worked all their working lives in different industries really have no idea what I do. They think, oh, he hires people. That's what he does. Or people have the impression, when you say you work in HR, they envision Toby from The Office, the constant like, wah, wah, you can't have fun. You can't do any of the things that. Now, Michael Scott, in Toby's defense, Michael Scott needed someone to rein him in from time to time. But
Yeah.
in reality, I don't do either of those things really, and I don't think most CHROs or chief people officers really do those things day to day. I find myself for the most part, I would say, paving the way, removing obstacles and barriers for my team to be able to deliver on our commitment to our workforce and to be able to empower our strategic plan as an organization through people and talent and culture strategies. Now that's a lot of $10 words. What does that really mean? I think that means something different in every organization. For us, we have a large population of frontline employees, and it's a difficult industry. It's a high caregiver fatigue industry. There's some turnover challenges that we deal with as an industry. We have a number of dynamics which have to be addressed in our strategy if we're going to move the organization forward. And so, I'm constantly connecting with my peers on the executive team and my direct reports in HR to say, all right, here's our strategic plan as an organization. Here are the challenges we know we are going to face internally and externally, but here's how we've got to move forward and where we need to go. So what do we need to put into place from a people perspective to make that happen? And I mentioned the example of addressing that frontline workforce challenge. There are many others, but that's just a real life nuts and bolts example that we've got to figure out as an organization if we're going to be successful. And the people team does that work all day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I love how you connect the dots too, that, you're taking that information, the data your people team is getting, maybe those, turnover reports. Why is this happening? Where's the areas where we're seeing this most? What can we do? Where can we step in? And taking that approach, and sounds like connecting dots with the rest of the leadership team as well, and saying, hey, what can we do about this as an organization, versus sometimes those answers feeling like they rest on just the people team or just the HR team, or that CHRO for that matter. And so balancing that as well, communicating that out and knowing it's a more than just one person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also helping people to, be as proactive as possible. So leaders throughout the organization, helping them to think, perhaps giving them the data that might help inform some decisions around people and talent, and say, all right, here are the indicators that we've learned through our data and our experience with the organization and with our workforce that are going to point to an outcome that is not desirable. So how can we work proactively to ensure that down the road our turnover report is much more favorable than it was last quarter, because sometimes looking in the rearview mirror is only so valuable. We've got to understand where we've been, and we've got to understand how we, got where we are today. But I think also trying to be as proactive as possible. And sometimes, leaders, especially in our industry, they are. If you're leading a team in healthcare, you are feeling the crunch from multiple perspectives, and you may not have time to stop and reflect on how to proactively address some people or talent gaps in
Mhm,
your particular part of the organization. So to have us
mhm.
there to say, hey, let's talk about this together, let's strategize, let us take pieces of this and come back to you, I think is one of the ways we add value.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharing the weight of that and working together in each of our areas so important. All right, so Parker, one of the things that you had mentioned, as you're kind of navigating that emotional labor from your maybe people leaders, right? They're dealing with their own things. You mentioned the emotional crunch or the feeling the crunch with the things they're dealing with on their plate, and then there's the HR team or the people team that's kind of elevating some of that feedback and data to help hopefully maybe address some of that or areas of opportunity, but also carrying that emotional labor that goes along with that too, which is largely not visible to the rest of the organization, the things that they're navigating. What has been successful, or how have you kind of helped bring some of those things to visibility for your team as they're doing that kind of quiet work behind the scenes?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's true for HR professionals just, across the board is that we want to be positioned to have really great impact and to help people, both the workforce, also to help leaders to execute on their strategy. We are a shared service function within the organization. We support internal clients. So if we're positioned to do that, I have found that HR professionals generally get energy from being asked to support and help and engage in that meaningful way, a way that's meaningful to them and to the organization. So, yes, the calendar can get really full. You can have a lot of meetings. You can, feel the weight of that. But at the end of the day, I think if HR people feel positioned to really make that impact, then it's worth it to them, and they kind of work through that. I think the sustained emotional impact with, if you're in like an employee relations function, there can be specific parts of HR that carry with it a lot of emotional weight. And I think in those moments, you've got to do what you need to do for yourself as a professional and keep, self-care at the top of your list. Otherwise, you're not any good to the organization. But at the organizational level, from that viewpoint, I've always just said, I want HR to be a part of the conversation, to be at the table, but I don't want us to force our way in. I want us to demonstrate value over time, and I want people to begin to organically think, where's HR? HR should be a part of this conversation. And I just do that through working really hard every day, encouraging my team to work really hard every day, producing great results and outcomes. And ultimately, that comes over time. That trusted relationship is built over time. And then, HR is dependent upon, and individual HR professionals are dependent upon.
hmm I love that. Making ourselves indispensable at the table, right? We need to be there, and they're asking, why are we not there if we're not? So that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, that's a perfect segue for us. So far today in our HR wine bar, we've been able to see our wine. We've given it a little swirl and hearing some of Parker's thoughts on his role in the CHRO seat. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy because we've come to our sniff test portion of the podcast.
So, Parker, our sniff test is when we propose scenarios to you and just kind of get your feedback. It feels a little job interview-ish, but we just
I
kind of
hope I
want
do
to.
well.
I hope
Goodness.
so too. I'm sure it'll be terrific, but we kind of like to use these case studies as opportunities to investigate our own thinking. Is that the track I would have gone down? How am I aligning with the guests that we have on? So we propose scenarios. This is why I said it doesn't get any easier. The hot seat is still real on this at this wine bar. So here is our first scenario. A leadership person comes to HR with an urgent request. A major operational initiative needs to launch quickly faster than you had originally anticipated in order to meet some external pressure from funding timelines, community need, or some kind of competitive positioning. The leaders are confident they can figure it out as they go. And I'm using air quotes there. You as HR see some risks in this, right? Incomplete training, uneven communication, role confusion, and the potential for some burnout in the teams that are already stretched thin. So from your seat as CHRO, this isn't a question of whether the speed matters. We know that it does. The question is whether the organization can absorb the downstream consequences and still maintain the trust and still maintain a high level of performance and still maintain the reputation that you've built as a function within the organization. So my questions for you, my first one is, does this acceleration decision strengthen the enterprise, or does it create some hidden costs that you anticipate will surface later in turnover, disengagement, credibility loss? What's kind of your thought process as you're presented with this scenario?
Mm. I think the first question is, have we envisioned the scenarios? So you've got the leader in front of you saying this has to launch ASAP, very, very
Right.
short timeline. Yeah, right now. So that is one scenario. Have we actually just stopped to envision other scenarios? And do we all agree that that timeline is, that the pressure that the leader is articulating for a shortened timeline, is that pressure legitimate? Sometimes we all feel something in the moment, and if you're really close to it, you may not be able to zoom out enough to see the perspective that, there's another perspective to be accounted for that's maybe not the one you thought of, right? So that's the first thing I would do is, just pressure test that with the leader and say, all right, I hear you, that this is a timeline or there's a pressure on this timeline. Let's talk about that. And is that pressure real or is it perceived? That's the first thing I would think through. The next thing is if let's assume that it's real and we got to go with a condensed timeline. I think being really clear about what that means. What does the deliverable look like? What's being sacrificed? What are we not doing in order to meet the timeline? And then I would, if it's an enterprise objective, I would make sure that the executive team is aware of that. So, hey, to the leader who's in front of me, you've articulated a really clear case for a condensed timeline. There are pressures associated with that. Given the impact to this thing, organizationally, we should make sure that our peers are really aware that, hey, we've got a condensed timeline. Here's why, and here are the implications of that. We would normally deliver X, and here are the benefits of that deliverable. Because of the condensed timeline, we have to deliver Y, and this is what that's going to look like. And so let's talk about the delta between ideal and real and understand as a team what we're getting into. And that way we're all on the same page. There's not a situation down the road where it's that leader who's come forward that's, by themselves on the end of the limb. It's not HR by themselves at the end of the limb. We're all making this decision with eyes wide open. Can the organization absorb it in the future? Probably. Most organizations I've encountered, if you say to people, I need you to step up, I need you to let's acknowledge this is not an ideal moment. I mean, COVID is the best example of that, right?
Yeah.
This is not an ideal moment, but this is really a situation where we are going to have to figure it out as a team and move forward. And you ask people to dig deep. You ask people to find grit, which is one of our core organizational values. They typically do it. Now, there can be a dark side of that, and there can be an over-reliance on any strength. It can be a derailer. And so, you got to be very careful, I think, when you ask people to do that and how often you ask people to do that. And if you find yourself doing that a lot and it becomes a cultural issue where that's just part of who you are as an organization, we always have condensed timelines unnecessarily, or we always ask people to dig too deep when we don't need to, that's a problem. But if it's an occasional thing that's driven by factors outside your control as an organization, I think people generally understand that.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you do an excellent job of communicating around that too. We've talked a lot about helping people understand the why, right? When we talk about something that's so unprecedented, like COVID, or something, like you said, way outside of our control, that we'd completely have to kind of erase everything we were doing and start something new and just jump in and figure it out. People are usually, to your point, much more willing when they understand kind of the why of what we're doing and how we're going to get there together, even if we have never done it before.
Yes,
That's
and I think
that's
they
also the
feel
MO.
right, and they feel brought along. They feel like,
Yes,
okay, we're all in this together. We're linking arms. We're moving through this big challenge together, and sometimes some really great relationships are forged in the heat of battle. Whatever that may be.
absolutely. Yeah, and you look back and can see what you've accomplished. That's pretty cool too.
Yeah, yeah. You can't battle all the time, but the occasional battle sometimes can pay off.
Absolutely. All right. So, Parker, the second scenario we had on our sniff test today was really one that's more about values versus operational pressure. And our scenario is that the organization publicly emphasizes values like dignity, inclusion, and employee well being. Those values are real. They show up in the language we see in the break room, in trainings and leadership messaging. But at the same time, operational pressure is mounting, and there are productivity targets that are slipping. Managers are asking for stricter enforcement policies. Maybe we've reduced some flexibility because we need to move things along, or we've taken faster corrective action to stabilize performance. And now HR is caught, again, in the middle between protecting that integrity of those values and who we say we are as an organization, but also responding to the leaders who are accountable for those results. So, in this case, as the CHRO, how do you evaluate whether a decision protects long-term culture credibility and not just short-term operational relief?
It's a great question because I think we find ourselves in that situation a lot.
Yeah.
When you have situations where you have a particular mission as an organization, whatever that might be, and then ultimately your employees feel that at times there's examples of you kind of not within as an organization, perhaps not living up to that mission in some way or another. I would frame it maybe just slightly differently, and which I probably is totally a foul for your question. I probably can't do that, but I'll do it anyway because I'm the guest and I can do that.
That's right. You make the
Exactly.
rules.
And that's right. There you go.
Hmm.
I think values, first of all, are organizational values that paint the picture of who we are. So you can look at those in multiple ways. You mentioned dignity and respect. Certainly that means we're going to treat our workforce, our stakeholders, customers, whoever it may be, with dignity and respect. It also means that in order for us to be whatever we need to be, profitable, productive, stay in business, we are going to need dignity and respect for our mission as well. So if we find ourselves in a situation like you're articulating where, okay, we've had, whatever it is, productivity pressures, market pressures, Wall Street pressures, and we now have to ratchet up performance management or ratchet up, we may even have to do layoffs, whatever it might be, that is, the difficult part, at times the most difficult part of what we do in HR. We're acting in a way that is consistent with our values and mission organizationally, in order to stay in business and do what we need to do. I would say HR is not really in the middle there because as an HR function, my job is to empower leaders to run their business. So leaders are identifying this gap where, all right, I've got to do more with less. I've got, too many people, for example. Well, HR is going to step in and help them navigate that. But we're doing that together. And if there's a situation, I think a red flag is anytime we feel like we're not operating together, where HR is sort of, out in front and, I am the face of the layoff, for example, that's not a great there's an organizational dysfunction there that I think needs to be addressed. Same thing with the leader. If I'm a leader by myself making a decision in a vacuum, and the support of the organization or the support of HR is not evident, that's also organizational dysfunction. Our job is to work together to make decisions which balance the best interests of our workforce and the business. So if in that situation that you're talking about, we have to make a really difficult call, whatever it is, we'll do that together. We'll support each other through that process. Nobody's really in the middle. Nobody's kind of out on the limb because we're making that decision collectively. I think it is reflective of values most of the time because we're sustaining our values for the organization to be successful beyond this really difficult moment.
It's a fabulous answer, Parker. You passed the sniff test on that
Oh,
one.
thanks. Okay, I don't have to sweat anymore. Okay.
Well, no, we have one more.
Oh, so I could still bomb. Okay.
Yeah, we'll give you a third opportunity, but you're 2 for 3 already. So,
Okay.
okay, so number 3. HR is asked to step in because a senior leader's behavior is creating a disruption. Team morale is declining, turnover risk increasing, trust eroding. This leader, however, has really strong results, executive backing, positional authority, and HR doesn't really have the formal power, quote unquote, to discipline them or remove them. And the request is kind of vague, like, can you coach them? Can you smooth this over? Can you make this stop? And so, from a CHRO lens, this isn't just a coaching issue; it's a risk to the whole organization, right? And so here's the sniff test. Is HR being asked to enable the organization to avoid a hard leadership conversation or to genuinely strengthen leadership effectiveness? It's all very suspect. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it depends really on whoever this person's boss is. So let's just say this person reports to the CEO. At that level of the organization, those leaders have such a tremendous impact on the culture of the organization, on the culture of the workforce. That CEO has to have an HR partner. Hopefully, it's the CHRO, and hopefully, they're really great. That can really hold a mirror up to that moment and say, okay, let's talk about the impact of this person in this big seat, and what they're bringing to the table at the moment and how they're showing up and how that impacts the organization. Now, you mentioned some tactics or some strategies with coaching and with honest conversations and all of that. There is a place for that, and that should absolutely be in the tool belt to be utilized as a means to improve something like you've described. I'm assuming that that's been tried. And if that isn't working, that again needs to be part of the mirror that's held up to that CEO to say, here are the things we've tried. Here's the road we've been down, and it's not been successful for the organization. And ultimately, I think it's probably one of the harder decisions that you have to make. You've got a really strong leader from a operational perspective, but it's not just about what you do as a leader. It's about how you achieve those results. And if those two things are not working in tandem and don't reflect well on each other, then ultimately that leader has, at the end of the day, probably a much more negative impact on the organization than anyone realizes, because other people, people are very insightful and intuitive, and other people see this leader who's, performing in a way that's not consistent with values, perhaps, maybe creating environments on their team that are not favorable, all those things. And if that behavior is allowed to continue to move forward and perpetuate, it has even more negative consequences for culture, which also has to be part of the conversation with the CEO, I would say. So hopefully trust is there with the CHRO and the CEO. You can have that conversation in an open and honest way, talk about where you've been, talk about the cultural impact of continuing to allow it to continue. And hopefully you get to a good decision for the organization and probably for the person involved, because my guess is their behavior probably reflects some level of discontent or dissatisfaction within the job themselves. And sometimes people need some help in managing that if they can't manage it on their own.
Yep. Spectacular. So well done, Parker, 3 for 3.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And you're out of the hot seat for just a second because we are going to take a quick pause and let this breathe for just a moment. We'll be right back.
Thinking about self-funded health insurance?
Every HR department must go through the process at some point. You're sitting there with 25, 50, maybe 100 employees, staring at a renewal notice of 15%, wondering how you can better control your program.
Ellerbrock Norris is there to help. If you're in a fully insured or level funded plan today, it may be time to look at self funded options. The team at Ellerbrock can walk you through how to contain any unexpected costs, how to gain better control of your pricing, and how to reinvest those savings back into your plan to ultimately take care of your people.
Set up your free benefits consultation at ellerbrock-norris.com today to better protect your purpose.
My Staff connects the right people and the right companies, fast, friendly, and focused on results. From temporary staffing to executive recruitment, the My Staff team knows Nebraska business and delivers a job done right. When it comes to corporate staffing, Stephanie Todd gets it done. She's been in your seat as a talent acquisition specialist, HR generalist, and business partner, and now she's putting that experience to work for you. Email Stephanie at mystaff.com today. Whatever your hiring need or career move, My Staff is your employment partner for a job done right. Visit mystaff.com or call 402-614-1441. Because at My Staff, we're not just recruiters, we're partners in your success story.
Welcome back. Let's move into our second pour and dig a little deeper. Before we do that, I do want to take a moment to thank our sponsors who make this HR Wine Bar possible, as well as our friends at Haram. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to walk us into our second pour.
So I had just told Parker he was out of the hot seat, and now you're right back in it. Look how quickly that happens.
It does. And you're on a second pour, and I've yet to have any
right.
wine
We
in
haven't
the HR wine
actively-
bar.
Yeah.
I'm going
we
to
haven't-
lodge a formal complaint.
Exactly. Yes, we will send you your bottle shortly. And so
That would be it would be a totally different podcast, I think, if we had all had one glass of wine.
Right.
You know.
And I think in a previous conversation, Parker, you had talked about being a fan of a California Red, if I'm not mistaken. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay, then we will work on that for you.
Thank you.
Okay. So our second pour is diving a little deeper, less about scenarios and more just, your thoughts on specifically on HR at the enterprise level. So when you're sitting at the leadership table, how do you conceptualize or decide which HR issues belong in the conversation and which ones don't? I don't have a really good dig into possibilities of what those concepts would be, but the enterprise table, many of our listeners are not at the C-suite level, right? And they don't have access to that space. So if you could kind of walk us through how the thought process changes when you elevate into that CHR role, that'd be great.
Sure. I think first it's what are the people and talent strategies that are aligned to our actual strategic plan as an organization. So hopefully, there's a clear strategic direction for the organization, and hopefully HR has worked to align people and talent and culture strategies to that strategic plan. And then hopefully that translates into goal plans, roadmaps, all the things. So what are we doing over the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months as an HR team to execute on an HR plan, which supports the organization's strategic plan. So there's that work, first and foremost, that we talk about, which is known work. This is where we know we're going to go based on the plan. Hopefully the executive team has had some input or visibility to the development of that plan. We all know it's aligned to the organization's strategic direction. So I would kind of bucket that as sort of one category of content, the known people, talent, and culture strategies that we need to leverage to move the organization forward, and we have to execute effectively on those. The others are probably at the moment they're unknown. Often these are strategies that we have to deploy to respond or react to things happening in the market, things happening in the workforce, things happening in our industry, whatever it may be. And, I really rely on my team a lot. I have a fantastic team of HR professionals at Mosaic. We also have networks and connections, organizations like Haram and SHRM and others that we rely upon to inform how we view some of those market and industry pressures. But as an executive team, we're talking about bringing to bear whatever resources we need in order to address those things. And so my filter is always first, business leader first, HR leader second, and thinking about how I view the challenge we face as a business first, and digging in and learning as much about that as I can, because as someone who did not come from that industry, I'm always learning and always trying to absorb information from my peers who have spent much more time in this industry than I have in the healthcare space. So that's another big part of it is trying to understand as a business leader what is this problem, what is the root cause, how do we diagnose that, and then with an HR specialty lens, how do I view this perhaps differently than my peers, and then how do we have conversation about that effectively?
I love that answer. There is definitely a perspective shift that the business first, HR second, that I don't know that many of our kind of folks who are new into HR understand that to get to the CHRO level, you really do have to conceptualize your role in the business differently to elevate up to that. And I also love the duality of the known and unknown.
Yeah, and I think
Fantastic.
and I think sometimes I find myself, I think HR leaders in general find themselves in positions where you gotta look at a business problem from multiple perspectives. There's the HR perspective, but there are multiple angles of every problem. And sometimes we have to say, all right, we recognize that, the HR team may propose certain solutions, but based on the totality of this challenge and the multiple angles we're looking at it from, one of those other solutions needs to be our priority right now. And then we'll execute on that, hopefully really effectively. We'll make some progress, and then we'll come in with other proposed solutions, maybe including the HR proposed solutions after that. So recognizing that your perspective as the HR leader has to come second, because we've got to be able to balance priorities from across the organization as an executive team. I think that's really important.
Mhm. Absolutely. Fantastic. Um, so, do you have some frame of reference to talk to us a little bit about when you do feel really strongly that there is something HR specific that really should take priority above some other thing that maybe is not time sensitive or doesn't have the same kind of domino effect after the fact? How do you position your argument with your leadership team? And I hate to go from a negative perspective, but how do you propose that maybe folks should think a little bit differently about the HR initiative and why it might need to be elevated above?
I hope it's not an argument, because
Right.
that may
I
point to
mean
something.
argument in, like, the structured,
Right.
logical sense, not in the,
Yeah.
fisticuffs. That's not
Right. No. Yeah. No. No. Um, I I generally think for HR strategies specifically, when I'm advocating for something that I think is important, I I want to do it with partners. So if I am the only one that thinks that this is important, whatever this is, that is a flag for me. And because we as an executive team expect all of our leaders to think about business problems first, just like I mentioned, and not their respective areas of the responsibility, if I'm proposing something that I think is a solution, I'm coming to it from that perspective. As a business leader, I think this is a good solution. Sometimes when I begin that sentence, I think this is a really potential great solution. It's not my solution I'm going to advocate for. It's the finance solution. I think we need to do something differently in our finance uh, world or our communications world, whatever it might be. So if I think there's an HR solution, I hope I have a partner in that. I hope our COO is right there with me, or I hope our CFO is right there with me, because they too see the value in what it is that I'm proposing. So sometimes, having if there's major budget impact to something, I'm going to always grab the CFO first and say, I think this is a potential solution, but there's real significant budget impact. What do you think? The CFO is going to say, here's priorities that you're not aware of from a budget perspective. Let's talk about those. Now, what do we think collectively? And maybe I'll step away from what I proposed, or maybe I'll be even more convinced that it's the right direction. And then when we go to the executive team, we're together on that. not because we're trying to, bring a score up like two versus others. That's not what it's about. But it's just more information and more perspective that is included in the development of a proposed solution is much more valuable than one person coming at it from one perspective.
Fantastic. I believe when we do produce this series, The Language of Leadership, I think Tara Wisdom, our guest, who is our CFO guest, would agree with you. That's very in line with a similar type of answer that she gave. So I love the continuity of that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I'd like for you, Parker, to help us, and our listeners kind of differentiate what makes a strong leader in the HR function. So what do you think HR leaders, maybe underestimate the importance of as they're working their way up the career ladder? What are they underestimating?
What are they underestimating? Um, there's a couple of things that come to mind. The first is has actually to do with advocacy, which we just talked about. I think really understanding how to balance your advocacy effectively with data, with multiple perspectives is very important. And I think having self awareness to know what your own blind spots are as a leader and to know what your own biases are to the extent that we can know those biases is really important. So that when you do come forward with a proposed solution, you can balance your advocacy on this solution or balance your perspective, whatever it might be, in a way that is already well vetted and well thought through, is balanced with multiple perspectives. You've thought through multiple angles. You've thought about how other parts of the organization will view what you're talking about. You've thought about all the other pressures that exist that we have to navigate. And you're coming to a problem with a particular perspective with all of that together. I think that's really important. Sometimes people will get frustrated about, I may say, I hear where you're coming from. I think you've got some very interesting perspective. I'm not gonna move forward with that right now. We're not gonna advocate for that right now. And people become frustrated with that. And it's because they have a hard time seeing the other perspectives and angles and understanding other priorities. So that's a big one. I think another one is the ability to effectively influence. I think your toast at the beginning, which was great, by the way. I think you said, I wrote it down, influence without ego, which I think is great. I also think you have to have influence in a way that helps people feel partnered with and helps people to build a relationship, but doesn't overly rely on either of those. I think that's important. And using influence in a way that helps people to shape their own perspective on an issue. It's really difficult to do, but if you can find a way to balance relationship, knowledge, and create a partnership, in a way that helps people to do that, I think that's also really important. Um, I think the last thing that maybe I would mention is challenging traditional HR. um, and
Amen.
I don't. Okay, I was going to say, some people get a little angsty when I talk about this, but I am almost always the first person that people have to convince within the people team that we need to be doing something. I think that's a big thing. I think HR in general has a tendency to over-engineer. I think we can make things too complicated. Um, and just zooming out, stepping out of your HR shoes for a minute and looking at this from the perspective of an employee or of a leader. Um, is this too cumbersome? Is this too complicated? Do we really even need to be doing this, whatever this is? Those are really important questions. And if what value is this adding? And if it isn't adding value, do we need to be doing it?
Yeah, fantastic. you give such beautifully well thought out, structured answers, and I have ideas, and I'm like, nope, he wrapped it up in a beautiful little bow at the end, and then I don't have anything else to add. Well done. I was struck by an image that I had when you and Jamie were talking in the kind of see and swirl area of our conversation of walking beside a leader, right? And the true business partner sense that everything needs to make sense. And I think you're absolutely right. The over engineering that we do sometimes in HR, I think out of a desire to get in front of problems before they really exist, solutions in search of a problem. Right?
Yeah.
And that's a really great point, and sometimes we just need to walk beside and listen and ask about what people need first. So,
Yep.
well said. So the last section of our, wine bar podcast structure is a wine flight, which is kind of a teaching moment where we try to summarize a spectrum of information, and I'm gonna, turn that over to Jamie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have a vision of Moira Rose, if you're a fan, and she's trying her fruit wines. Hopefully these are a little
Earlier.
bit better than
And we just
Yes.
lost Catherine O'Hara, so
We
may this be in her honor.
did.
That
I
was so
know. We
sad. But one of
dedicate
my
this
favorite
episode.
lines is when she says, "This wine is awful. Give me another glass." That's one of my favorite lines that she says. So,
So great.
yeah.
So we'll
And
dedicate this to her, our wine flight today. But what we do in this section is we really start as if we've got our glasses out in front of us and we've got our sweet, our medium, and our dry wines, and we compare that to the facets of what you've shared with us today, in kind of this HR leadership spectrum, right? And finding that perfect blend between our sweets and our dries. So on the sweet side, we've got our Moscato or whatever of our empathy, care, and connection, right? The pieces that we know are so critical in the relationship and what Amy was just talking about of walking beside our people and really building those relationships and that human element of the role that we play. Balancing that with our medium glass of wine in kind of that people and performance, right? We have to have a balance of the performance, the accountability that comes into that. And then over on the dry side, we've got kind of that risk, governance, compliance, our reputation, all the things that are going to be important to the organization and maintaining stability and continuity. So finding that perfect blend and HR leaders working hard across the organization to help other people leaders do the same thing, right? Balancing that care and empathy and relationship with the things that have to be in place in order for us to be successful. So that's our wine flight for today.
That's
awesome.
an excellent visualization. I love that. And I think if I can I comment on just the way you
Of
pictured
course.
that? I think it's people are much more open to having difficult conversations with you and to receiving difficult feedback, which can be on the dry end of your visualization there, right? If you have balanced effectively with the relationship, with the empathy, if they know that you care about them as a person, if they know that your heart is in the right place, they know that you're all in on the mission of the organization, they know you're all in on the work, but you got to look at them and say, I'm going to give you some really difficult feedback, or I'm going to say something that you may not want to hear. They value that even more, and that just, I think, strengthens your relationship, because you have balanced that effectively. Whereas if you entirely live on one side or the other, you're not able to effectively navigate that. So
Yeah.
I agree very much with your visualization there. That's great.
I love your addition. Also, a perfect way to wrap up our flight. So that's perfect.
So we have all agreed that we're perfection. Well done.
Big pats on the back for all of
Big
us.
pat. Yeah. So, Parker, we want to thank you for your time today and helping us understand what it means to speak CHRO at any level, and for being the capstone of our Language of Leadership series. Again, 104, CEO, CFO, COO, and now CHRO. We couldn't be more delighted with what you've shared with us today, and I'm sure our listeners will feel the same. So, for our listeners out there, here's your call to action. We would love for you to take some of Parker's ideas and conceptualize those. Reflect on where you are in your HR career and how you can better walk beside leadership and the folks that you're serving, and think about how your wine flight from sweet to dry, where have you been sitting in the past 6 months or so, and maybe where do you need to adjust in order to be more effective in your practice. So that's our call to action for this episode, and we're ready to close. So I'm going to raise my sparkling Celsius here, and I think Jamie has one too. Yeah, for our closing toast. So to the leaders who carry the people agenda forward,
and to the courage it takes to lead with integrity.
Cheers to HR.
Cheers to HR.
Cheers to HR.
My Staff connects the right people and the right companies, fast, friendly, and focused on results. From temporary staffing to executive recruitment, the My Staff team knows Nebraska business and delivers a job done right. From Norfolk to Scottsbluff, Steph Miller knows Nebraska recruiting. With more than 20 years of experience, she connects talented professionals with the companies that need them most. For your next key hire, call Steph at 402-614-1441. Whatever your hiring need or career move, My Staff is your employment partner for a job done right. Visit mystaff.com or call 402-614-1441, because at My Staff, we're not just recruiters, we're partners in your success story.
Does this sound familiar? You get your annual renewal notice and see your premiums rising every single year. But what are you going to do? If you get quotes from other carriers, you face an uphill battle. More and more change for your people year over year.
Benefits shouldn't be a once-a-year scramble. Ellerbach Norris helps you think long-term. Long-term planning for your benefits package, long-term planning around employer retention, long-term planning around key people, and long-term planning built for cost savings.
Ellerbach Norris is here to help you build a plan that's better for the bottom line and better for the people it's protecting.
Get your free benefits consultation today at ellerbach-norris.com.
HR